Hello everybody. Now my face is really big. So we're gonna look at, I have a number of items here. I hope we can get to all of them, but we're gonna look at materials that all live in Providence Public Library special collections that are related to the ways that people have thought about the science of sleep. I say through the ages. We have stuff here spanning from the 1780s to the 1950s, and some of it will be very similar to the way we still think about sleep and how it works. Some of it will be seem kind of silly. And I also, when I was researching this case, was interested to learn how recently some of the contemporary sleep science has come to light, that is pretty recent knowledge in terms of how long people have been doing that research. I'm really excited for Dr. Karczmar to add some more to that, because obviously this is something that he knows a lot more about. There's going to be a quick blip here. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see a book and see my face at the same time. Let's see. Okay. It's thinking hard. All right. And so hopefully now you can see my hands and a book. And yeah, so I'm just going to go through these while we're looking at things. Feel free to ask questions or save a question for later. Dr. Karczmar, if you want to add anything while I'm talking, please do. If you have questions about any of these or anything that you'd like to add, I would love that to also kind of guide how we move through these. And we're going to start with the oldest thing that I have for us today, which is from 1784. And this is something that is, I would say, not extremely gripping to look at, aside from the fact that it's printed on some lovely paper and really quite old. It's an essay on sleep. And the thing that is sort of interesting about this to me is that it's thinking about sleep in terms of the body and the soul. It talks at fair length about how the soul is the part of the body that sleeps and the rest of the body is continuing to do its thing, as it were. And so this one, I think, is sort of, thinking about some of the religious aspects and the material and immaterial aspects of humankind and using sleep as a way to examine that. I'm not going to read from this one, but I do just sort of want to start from that, just because that is the oldest thing we have to offer here. And if anyone has questions or wants to talk about that, feel free while I pull out our second book, which is something that we can talk about a little longer.
Can I just add something to that? So first of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me to join you. That first book that you showed is interesting, because it really gets into one of the things that you mentioned at the outset, which is that the science of sleep is relatively new. It really wasn't until the early 20th century that we had any scientific notion or study of sleep. Prior to this, sleep was defined more in the context of absence of being awake, and people made analogies to sleep being almost akin to being dead. So there was also a very spiritual component to the understanding of sleep. One of the things that's really interesting that some of you may know is the concept of first and second sleep, which was described. I believe even Shakespeare mentioned it. It's so it was the notion that when before we had artificial light, people would go to sleep when it got dark, and they would wake up when it was sunlight again. And people would sleep in these two phases, where they would sleep till around midnight or 1 a.m. and they would naturally wake up and pray, read, make love, and then would go back to sleep for a second phase of sleep. So the concept of sleep that we have right now, which is this uninterrupted block of time, is something that's relatively new to us.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm hoping that we also can talk a little more when we're looking at some stuff about circadian rhythms, about like how humans sleep and wake. So this next book, see if I can find, oh, this is not the one I wanted. Hang on. This is the one I wanted. So this is a nice tiny little book. This one is from 1852, and this was actually part of the original collection of library books at Providence Public Library. So when the library first opened, there was a small collection of books here, and this was one of them. And you can tell because it has this stamp on the title page from the Mechanics Library, and books from the Mechanics Library were part of the inaugural collection here. And this was written by Samuel Griswold Goodrich. He wrote as Peter Parley. He wrote books for young people that were about geography, biology, science, the natural world. He wrote sometimes along with his brother. And he also, fun fact, lived in Jamaica Plain in Boston before it was part of Boston. And the land where he used to live has been subdivided into a bunch of residential streets. And so there's actually a road called Peter Parley Road. It's right near Franklin Park in Jamaica Plain. So I just want to say now you can walk down Peter Parley Road and say, I know why this has this name. And so this book is about basically everything. If you can see this table of contents here, it has all kinds of lovely things like a table of thermal waters, a whole chapter on the color of the ocean, and another on the utility of the ocean. There are some things about this book that are very much still our current scientific understanding, and some that are alarmingly different. But this is one thing that is pretty interesting to me because when I read it, it didn't seem extraordinarily dated. So it does describe it as a curious phenomena, which I would say people definitely still do. But, you know, I'm going to read a paragraph from this. The approach of sleep is announced by diminished activity of the mind and loss of power of attention. The senses become blunted to external impressions, and we feel an unconquerable desire for stillness and repose. Our ideas grow more confused, our sensations more obscure, our sight fails us, and if our ears still perceive sounds, they are indistinct and seem as though distant. The eyelids close, the joints relax. We instinctively assume an easy position and fall into a sleep which at first is deep, then soft and gentle, and becomes gradually less sound as time for waking approaches. It talks about how animals sleep, which I think is very sweet. Talks about how a crocodile hides itself in the mud. But I love this book because it's from the 1850s and written for children, but really everything that it says, there's nothing in here, in this section, where I read it and was like, oh no, that's not how we think about it anymore.
It's pretty spot on.
Yeah, it's really quite spot on in a way that was almost surprising to me. And I also appreciate that there are things like that children sleep very soundly, old people sleep less soundly, things that we now have more detailed scientific knowledge of, but clearly the observational knowledge that was in place at the time was pretty spot on.
Yeah, agree.
And so I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Dr. Karczmar. Well, I pulled up the next book.
I thought it was a great description of observational description of what happens during sleep. I was noticing that that paragraph, the beginning paragraph on page 224, animals in general require less sleep.
Yeah,
that really is species related. It varies. So that's not necessarily true.
I'm noticing that my pinned screen has a real delay. So I'm sorry if I'm talking about something and you're not seeing my hands doing that thing yet. But there is now a new book. This is a book that I love. It is not an early edition of this, but this is sort of, maybe when you were growing up, you had something like Reader's Digest, Guide to Home Medicine, or something like that on your shelf. So this is a book Once my screen catches up, I guess you'll see the title page. But this is a book that was the first of its kind in terms of being a book that was designed for people to have at home that would describe different symptoms and treatments for common things that could be happening in terms of the health of people in your family. I'm sorry, the delay is like 15 seconds. It's very confusing. Okay, so this book was written by Dr. William Buchan, who was a Scottish doctor. It was first written in 1769 and was hugely popular. It went through, I think, 19 English editions during his lifetime and more after his death, including this one. And it was translated into every European language. And I also read that Catherine the Great liked it so much that she sent Buchan a gold medal. And this apparently was also a book that you could find all around the world. So, you know, people would describe like traveling to some pretty remote place and finding this on someone's bookshelf. You will see it in 15 seconds after I do it. But there are two sections here that I want to take a look at. The first one is of sleep and clothing. And this is lovely because none of it seems really out there, but it is very moralistic in the way that it talks about sleep. I guess I'll read part of it since you can't see the page yet, since the internet is being slow. Nature points out night as the proper season for sleep. Nothing more certainly destroys the constitution than night watching. It is great pity that a practice so destructive to health should be so much in fashion. How quickly the want of rest in due season will blast the most blooming complexion or ruin the best constitution is evident from the ghastly countenances of those who, as the phrase is, turn day into night and night into day. To make sleep refreshing, the following things are necessary. First, to take sufficient exercise in the open air throughout the day. Next, to eat a light supper. And lastly, to lie down with a mind as cheerful and serene as possible. This part is great. And then there's also a section that I would like to skip to that is about nightmares and how to prevent nightmares, because this part, which you will apparently see in 15 seconds, is really funny, especially compared to the previous section, which is pretty much how we still think about things. There are two paragraphs that I'm going to read to you here. In this disease, the patient, in time of sleep, imagines he feels an uncommon oppression or weight about his breast or stomach, which he can by no means shake off. He groans and sometimes cries out, though oftener he attempts to speak in vain. Sometimes he imagines himself engaged with an enemy and in danger of being killed, attempts to run away, but finds he cannot. Sometimes he fancies himself in a house that is on fire, or that he is in danger of being drowned in a river. He often thinks he is falling over a precipice, and the dread of being dashed to pieces suddenly awakes him. This disorder has been supposed to proceed from too much blood, from a stagnation of blood in the brain, lungs, etc., but it is rather a nervous affection and arises chiefly from indigestion. Hence we find that persons of weak nerves who lead a sedentary life and live full are most commonly afflicted with the nightmare. Nothing tends more to produce it than heavy suppers, especially when eaten late or the patient goes to bed soon after. Wind is likewise a very frequent cause of this disease, for which reason those who are afflicted with it ought to avoid all flatulent food. Deep thought, anxiety, or anything that oppresses the mind ought also to be avoided. So just so you know, if you're having trouble with nightmares, apparently you need to stop thinking deeply and also stop eating beans.
Yeah, I think that's very salient advice, and anything that avoids flatulence is probably good.
I mean,
especially if you're sharing a bed.
Yes.
But you know, this is interesting because the first piece of advice in terms of doing exercise in the afternoon and having a light meal before bedtime and trying to go to bed with a clear mind, that's not too different than what we advise folks now. The second part about nightmares, some of it sounds like something that we call sleep paralysis, which is a very interesting phenomenon that actually a lot of people experience, but tends to be much more common in people who have narcolepsy, where people awaken from REM sleep. And one of the things that happens during REM sleep is is that our muscles are essentially paralyzed, so we can't move. But we also tend to do the bulk of our dreaming, or dreams tend to be most vivid during REM sleep. So what happens with sleep paralysis is that you can actually awaken from sleep, but your muscles are essentially still catching up. So you can't move. You literally are paralyzed, so to speak. This doesn't last very long, but when it does occur, it can be incredibly scary.
All right, just resharing the screen to see if I can get rid of that delay.
Angela, while you're doing that, we have a couple of comments and questions in the chat that are related to the last book. Jen Steinfeld says, doesn't Scrooge say something like, it's just a bit of gristle about the visions of the ghosts, which I guess what relates to like, are there literally foods that can change your sleep?
Yeah.
Well, yes, there aren't any great studies on this, but we know that there are certain foods that we think of as being more sleep promoting. We're all familiar with the Thanksgiving turkey dinner, high in tryptophan, which may have an impact on making us feel sleepy. There are other food items. One of the things that frequently people use to help them fall asleep is alcohol. And what alcohol does is it actually can help you fall asleep easier. But what happens is, as the alcohol is metabolized, it shifts our sleep to what we call lighter sleep. So the quality of that sleep becomes really, really fragmented and poor, which is part of what people experience as a part of a hangover.
All right, I love that, and I love thinking about the things that I should not be eating if I don't want nightmares. Janae, was there another question about that before I get to this next thrilling item?
Yes. What causes most sleep disorders? Is it issues with breathing?
No, the most common sleep problems relate to insomnia, either difficulty falling or staying asleep.
Thank you.
So this next item is a Saturday Evening Post from 1957. There's still a delay, so you'll just see what my hands were doing 15 or 20 seconds ago. This article I chose partly because I love the sort of mid-century imagery here, the giant EEG machine that looks like a cute robot with a name. And let's see if I can get this to focus a little. There, the guy strapped onto a board, like it's just, it's got a great 1950s look to it that's very appealing. But also this was the only thing I could find in our collections that had images, I'm going to zoom in on them, of the 1938 sleep experiments in Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, which is how it was the first real scientific study of circadian rhythms. So this gentleman here is also this wild-eyed scientist here. So this is Nathaniel Kleitman, who is, a lot of people consider him to be one of the founders of modern sleep science. And he and his graduate student decided to research whether our sleep-wake cycles and the temperature cycles that our bodies go through over the course of the day are innate, or whether it's something that we do in reaction to our habits or to sunlight or to the outdoor temperature. And so the way they decided to test this was to move into Mammoth Cave in Kentucky for a month, where the temperature doesn't vary and where there's no natural light. And this picture is just so wild. And there's another picture of them here in the cave. So this machine is testing how much they're moving around while they're sleeping. And here, the best detail, in my opinion, is these buckets. These are buckets of water so that cave critters can't get onto the legs of the bed and crawl up the legs of the bed onto the scientists while they're sleeping. Hey, that is a really good experimental design if you ask me. So after this experiment was done, the spoiler is that Nathaniel Kleitman, who was older, couldn't actually adjust his sleep-wake cycles, and his graduate student, who was much younger than him, his sleep-wake cycles adjusted, but his temperature cycles did not. So they were basically living an artificial 28-hour day is what they were trying to do. And then Nathaniel Kleitman ended up writing a book about it called Sleep and Wakefulness. And he also went on with another graduate student to be the first people to name and describe REM sleep.
Yeah, that's a great description. This is a classic study that's actually been reproduced. But yeah, Dr. Kleitman and Dr. Azarinsky are the grandfathers of sleep medicine, and you're absolutely correct that they are really the forefathers of modern sleep research. They were instrumental in describing REM sleep and also the link between REM sleep and dreaming. I think in the upper right-hand corner, there's a picture of Dr. William Dement.
Yeah.
Dr. William Dement, who's also a huge figure in sleep medicine, who was their graduate student at the time. He died not too long ago. But this study in Mammoth Cave was a classic study where essentially it looked at circadian rhythms. And if you think about sleep and when we sleep and why we sleep, so we think that there are these two forces that regulate or control when we sleep. So one is what's called a homeostatic mechanism, which basically says that the longer you stay awake, the more sleepy you're going to be. That's pretty intuitive. But then there's also a circadian mechanism, a circadian meaning around the day or 24 hours, that also regulates the timing of sleep. And this is felt to be built into our physiology. It's regulated by what we call the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it really does relate around roughly around 24 hours. Some people sleep is not exactly 24 hours. It can be a little short, or the cycle is not exactly 24 hours. It can be a little shorter, a little longer, but it roughly is 24 hours long.
All right, since I know we're running a little short on time, I'm going to pull out one more item that is directly related to this that I love, just so if we run out of time, we don't miss it. And I'm sorry there's such a delay that you're not going to see it for a little minute. But the next thing I'm pulling out is an Ovaltine advertisement. This particular one is from 1946. So Ovaltine was originally sold in pharmacies as an energy booster for tired people because it has a lot of minerals. And so it was, designed to give people energy if they were lacking in minerals. But eventually it became used more widely as a pre-bed drink for relaxation. And by the 1930s, it was being heavily marketed as a cure for insomnia. And part of the reason that I bring this up is that the Wander Company, which is the parent company of Ovaltine, was actually an early sponsor of some of the sleep research we were just talking about. So they were actually like a corporate sponsor because they were so invested in learning more about insomnia and their drink being like the insomnia drink. And so this particular ad is from the 1940s. As you can see, this person had some Ovaltine and is really just waking up feeling awesome. And I'm sad
in that very appropriate sleep dress.
Yeah, it's very appropriate. She has a bow in her hair. Her hair is curled. That's a good sleep. I have never woken up with my hair looking that good. And I'm sad that I couldn't find it, but there's this series of ads around the same time from Ovaltine, and it was all the different ways you could wake up feeling good. And so there's also a whole series. You can find them online, but apparently not in the Good Housekeeping magazines here. There was a whole bunch of them that said wake up gay and have people like jumping out of bed after drinking Ovaltine before bed. They're a real delight. But the wake up perky one is also really nice. And then some of the older ones just have, you know, wholesome, rosy cheeked looking children who presumably are full of minerals because they've been drinking their Ovaltine. So that one's kind of a novelty, but also fun to think about the things that we sort of colloquially do in our homes to treat insomnia or improve sleep that aren't necessarily scientific.
So it's kind of cool because I actually didn't know about the Ovaltine ads, and so I just looked up Ovaltine, and so Ovaltine is basically malt, right?
Yeah.
And minerals, and then you mix it with milk. Well, we know that milk has sleep promoting properties, and malt, because of its high sugar content, also can promote sleep. So it sort of worked as a potential sleep aid.
I think I have Ovaltine in my house right now, but not for sleeping, just because it's delicious. All right.
Angela, do you want to pause here and take some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. And then if we have time at the end, we can look at some of these other things, because we would sort of be moving on to the world of fresh air. And let's not do that unless we have time.
That sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Please feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. Angela, you got some nice encouragement. We are all very patient with the book timing. And pretty sure cave critters crawling on me would have led to future sleep disturbances.
Yes.
All right, we have a question from Dave or Sarah Weed. Is it a symptom of something else if you talk in your sleep?
You talk in your sleep. So yes and no. It's not unusual for people to talk in their sleep, but it depends on what part of sleep you do it in. If you do it during REM sleep, it can be a manifestation of something called REM sleep behavior disorder, which, if I remember, I mentioned that during REM sleep, our muscles tend to be inactive, paralyzed, and there is a disorder where that loss of muscle activity is gone, and people are now free to act out their dreams. So they can talk during the sleep, sometimes they yell, and sometimes they can have violent outbursts where they accidentally hit their bed partner or fall out of bed. It tends to occur usually in older men, and if it's something that that someone experiences, that does require evaluation because there's treatment for that. So if what I described sounds like it might be what the question is, that does warrant further evaluation.
Thank you. Another question. I am curious about the world of fresh air and night breezes, healthy or not? And that's from Ian Cousins.
Yeah. We have a lot of old science about night breezes, and maybe we can zoom through some of that. And then Dr. Karczmar, you can add some about what you think about temperature in air while people are sleeping. I have 3 different things that maybe I'll kind of zoom through in terms of how people have thought about cool night air while sleeping. So this first one, this Popular Science Monthly that you're seeing, and you will see another page at some point once this catches up, was actually, this is an article called The Remedies of Nature. It's from 1883, and it's actually about tuberculosis. So it seems pretty pertinent right now while we're in the middle of another airborne epidemic. And this is maintaining that tuberculosis symptoms are dramatically reduced by nightly sleeping in open air. So you have to do it a lot of nights in a row. And that sleeping in an airy bedroom is an essential component of health. I will say this also recommends drinking a couple glasses of cream sweetened cream before bed to counteract tuberculosis symptoms. So like take these recommendations with a grain of salt. I don't know if a couple glasses of cream is necessarily recommended. But this addresses briefly the fact that there was a real superstition that being in night air was bad for you previously. And so this is saying, by all events, get rid of the night air superstition and enjoy the blessing of an airy bedroom. The luxury, I might add. A natural instinct may be suppressed, but needs but little encouragement to resume its normal function, like a river returning to its ancient channel, thus the fresh air instinct. In families cursed with the night air superstition, children are often fuddled with miasma till they prefer it to fresh air and dislike to sleep near an open window. But in a single month, that aversion can be changed into a decided predilection till the cool breath of the night wind becomes a chief condition of a good night's rest, and the closing of the bedroom window creates a feeling of uneasiness, not unlike the discomfort induced by an attempt to sleep with your head under the blankets.
That's great. Well, there actually is some science behind this, which is that what happens when we fall asleep is our body core temperature drops, and we know that sleeping in excessively warm environment can disrupt sleep, can fragment sleep. So we actually recommend folks to lower the temperature in a bedroom to 60 degrees or so, or 62 degrees. So the whole notion of fresh air and airing the bedroom out may have some basis in our understanding of what happens during sleep.
Cool, thank you. I will not be telling my partner that, but I appreciate that. Let's see. Next, from Jen Steinfeld. Peter said that people used to sleep in 2 phases. Was this true year-round or primarily in the longer winter nights in the Northern Hemisphere?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure the answer to that. I'd have to look that up. My understanding was that it was year-round, but I see what you're getting at. That maybe with shorter days and longer nights, maybe that wasn't the case. I don't know the answer to that, but that's an interesting question.
Angela, was there in your many sleep books anything about seasons of the year?
There was not. There will be another one of these Curator tours where we'll talk about hibernation, and there is one that talks slightly about how humans don't hibernate but are inclined to sleep more in the winter. But honestly, that's the closest that I found in anything that I was looking at.
Right. That is the last of our questions for now. Angela, do you want to bring us home with some reading? And Dr. Karczmar, if you have any other final thoughts as well.
Yeah, I would love to read what my hands were doing 30 seconds ago. So this book that is open, and I'm not going to show you the title page because that will slow it down too much, is written by Catherine Beecher. It's called House and Home Papers, published in 1865. It's a housekeeping book. Catherine Beecher is actually the sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe. They wrote some other housekeeping books together. This one is interesting to me because it uses pretty moralistic terms, but it is talking about the benefits of the air of heaven in a well-ventilated house. So it's talking about how being a good housekeeper, in fact, means making sure that your house is well-ventilated, especially so that your children aren't bad. So take notes if you have children being bad in your house, or if you're seeing, and I quote, pale mothers and drooping babes, it's because there's not enough air. So I'm just gonna read a couple of paragraphs of this and then we can have our final thoughts on fresh air. No other gift of God, so precious, so inspiring, is treated with such utter irreverence and contempt in the calculations of us mortals as this same air of heaven. A sermon on oxygen, if one had a preacher who understood the subject, might do more to repress sin than the most orthodox discourse to show when and how and why sin came. A minister gets up in a crowded lecture room where the mephitic air almost makes the candles burn blue and bewails the deadness of the church. The church, the while, drugged by the poisoned air, growing sleepier and sleepier, though they feel dreadfully wicked for being so. Little Jim, who, fresh from his afternoon's ramble in the fields, last evening said his prayers dutifully and lay down to sleep in a most Christian frame, this morning sits up in bed with his hair bristling with crossness, strikes at his nurse and declares he won't say his prayers, that he don't want to be good. The simple difference is that the child, having slept in a close box of a room, his brain all night fed by poison, is in a mild state of moral insanity. Delicate women remark that it takes them till 11 or 12 o'clock to get up their strength in the morning. Query, do they sleep with closed windows and doors and with heavy bed curtains? This one's really interesting to me because I think it also sort of addresses something that is really entrenched societally, which is the idea that going to bed early and waking up early is somehow like healthy and moral, and that sleeping late means that you are either a lazy person or that there's something morally wrong with you. And I think that that's something that we haven't really touched on yet, but that I'd especially be interested to hear if there are actual known benefits to going to bed earlier and waking up earlier, or if that is just based on some of our cultural ideas around productivity.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up, because as somebody who is naturally more of a night owl, I've always felt that I was being discriminated against on a moralistic level for going to bed later and getting up later. But we know that there are natural tendencies for when people are sleepy and when they're not. And there is this concept of larks and night owls, people who are just naturally sleepy earlier in the evening. They go to bed earlier and they get up earlier. And there are other folks who aren't sleepy till later and go to sleep later and wake up later. And we call those night owls. And it's a perfectly normal phenomenon. But I agree, there is this sort of these moralistic overtones that seem to lump the people that sleep later and get up later into the sloth-like tendency. But there is there's a natural occurrence in teenagers, which is something called delayed sleep phase syndrome, where teenagers are naturally much sleepier at a later time and want to get up at a much later time. And I'm sure you've heard some of the information on trying to delay school start times for high schoolers for that very reason, because these students are sleep deprived. They're going to sleep later because they're not sleepy till later, but then they're waking up either by alarm clock or their parents to get to school early, and they really have not had their proper amount of sleep. So they're essentially arriving at school sleep deprived, and there's a lot of data to support these students are much more likely to have learning issues, mood disorders, higher risk of depression.
Wow. That explains a lot, I would say. Thank you both so much. Any other final thoughts?
I do just want to say that if people think up questions later about any of these books that we looked at, or you want more information about any of them, you can email sleepmode@provlib.org. There's also a button on the Sleep Mode webpage that says email the curator. Unfortunately, I don't have the answers to all of your personal sleep issues, but if you have questions about books, I do have answers to all of your personal book issues, or I can find the person who has those answers for you.
Thank you, Angela. Your library witchery is always appreciated. Thank you so much, Dr. Karczmar, for your time and for your expertise.
Pleasure. Thank you.
thank you everybody for being here. And also you'll see in the chat, I put in a link to our event evaluation form. Please fill out this form. Our ability to evaluate our programming helps us improve our offerings, and it's crucial for our fundraising events. And also please visit the Sleep Mode webpage. There's even more wonderful Sleep Mode events and curators talks to come. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.